In several of my tutorials, I've dealt with keyframe animation. I've also shown how the transition path between two keyframes can be defined by changing the interpolation curve of specific keyframes. If you're unfamiliar with the term interpolation curve, this is the name for the path that the animated parameter takes between two keyframes. In this video, I want to deal with a more advanced method of defining interpolation curves, one which allows a much more flexible approach. Bear with me on this one. The procedure is a little tricky, but worth it in the end. For the purpose of this tutorial, I'll be working with the Titles and Text plugin. Here I have a Titles and Text event on the timeline, and I've defined a set of keyframes that control the location of the text string. The Y coordinate for the third keyframe has been set at 0.88, which raises the text string at this point, then lowers it again to the next keyframe. Now, just to remind you what an interpolation curve is, this is it, the transition path between two keyframes. It determines how the transition progresses between the keyframes. In this default view, there are only 6 presets for the curve. I've not described these presets in detail before, so I'll do that now, before we get into the more complex procedures. A point to note about applying a preset to a keyframe is that it only applies to the curve between it and the next keyframe. As you've seen, presets are accessed by right-clicking the appropriate keyframe control point. Forget about the first 5 options for now. We're interested in the next 6. I'll start with the first of the 5, linear fade. This is the default preset and causes a straight linear transition between the two keyframes. The next one, smooth fade, applies a gentle transition at the start and end of the curve. Number 3 is fast fade. This causes a fast transition at the start of the curve and a smooth transition at the end. This one is good for preventing an abrupt stop at the end of the transition. Slow fade is the exact opposite to fast fade. Sharp fade is the exact opposite to smooth fade. The last preset is hold. This holds the state of the parameter at this keyframe until the next keyframe is reached. The state of the parameter then immediately changes to the state at that keyframe. I'll point out that the state of the keyframe is reflected by the change in colour on that control point. I'll just change that back to the default. And I'll change that value back to default. Now these 6 presets are usually sufficient for most purposes, but you can define your own curves if the presets don't suit. To do this, you need to switch to the Curves view. Now just a few words about this view. Some plugins don't allow the curves view. For instance, the Vegas Solid Color plugin doesn't allow it. You're stuck with the basic 6 presets. If you're unsure whether a particular plugin supports the curves view, just open the plugin's keyframe controller and see if the curves button is greyed out. If it is, the plugin doesn't support it. Now I need to click the Y header to get the required curve. You can see that selecting manual displays 2 black control points. In manual mode, you can see that the right-hand control point affects the curve after the keyframe. The left-hand control point does nothing. Now if we change that to split manual, this allows the left control point to control the curve before the keyframe. Now as you can see, this doesn't appear to be working. This is because the interpolation mode of the previous keyframe is by default linear, so this overrides the mode set at keyframe number 2. To achieve what I want to achieve, I have to set the interpolation mode of keyframe number 2 to manual or split manual. To set all the keyframes to split manual, I can select the remaining keyframes, right-click one of them and select split manual. Now you have to be careful. If you click off a control point, it switches to the X coordinate. As you can see, this one isn't having any effect on that last path. To change that, I would have to put another keyframe there. And change that to split manual. Now we'll just play that. Okay, I need to mention another right-click option. That's this Set To. When this is selected, this displays a slider that allows the value of that keyframe to be set precisely. This offers a more convenient way of adjusting that particular parameter rather than the fairly hit and miss method using the location Y parameter input. If you hold the control key down while moving the slider, it dampens the speed down so you can get a more precise setting. There's also a value input option that can be used. I've really only just scratched the surface of the potential of this keyframe feature. With imagination and patience, many cool effects can be achieved. This is something I knocked together earlier. Totally unproductive, but a bit of fun nonetheless, and an exercise in the kind of effects that can be achieved. I hope I've given you some food for thought. I imagine that this feature of keyframe animation is very much overlooked, which is a great pity. It deserves to be used, so let's use it. Until the next time, bye for now.